Hello and welcome to Supercharged, episode 191. I'm Adam Dotchis.
And I'm Tommy Hutton.
And today we're joined by a special guest, Eugenia Kuyda of Replika. Eugenia, how's it going today?
Very good, thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, thanks for being here. I've actually really wanted to talk to you for a while, and I'm glad we were able to get this going. I find what you're doing absolutely fascinating, and I've probably bored the listeners to death with some talk about NLP. For those who somehow don't know that yet, natural language processing. I was blanking there for a minute, but before,
I thought that was neuro-linguistic programming.
Is it? Well, I guess it's. We have acronyms for everything. I can't keep track of all of them.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, no, I know, but there's just so many to remember. I'm most interested in the generation aspect. Which you do a lot of with Replika, and it is, I think, the most compelling that I've seen. So I wanted to get into kind of the story behind it, how all of this happened, but first, I think maybe tell us a little bit about Replika from your perspective. What are you trying to accomplish these days with the application, and what does it do?
So Replika is an AI friend that you teach and grow through conversation. Its only purpose for now is to be your friend, to be a good friend, and to be there for you. We might also add more skills, more things that Replika can do for you in a very near future. But for now, it's there to talk to you whenever you need.
And so what are some of the use cases that you see for people using it in terms of talking to a friend? Because it does feel that way. Tommy and I have both spent quite a bit of time with it, and it's interesting how easy it is to forget that it's not a person or a human person.
Thank you so much. Probably the main use case is to be able to process and to kind of share what's going on with you in your life, and to be able to do that in a safe space without judgment, without any fears that of being judged or talking to someone, talking to a human that might have any opinions about that. So that probably use case number one, and it's exciting to see how many people actually need that and trust AI with their feelings and their thoughts.
Yeah, I was really
a lot
surprised
of users use Replika.
That so many people.
A lot of users talk to Replika, and that's a way for them to journal their thoughts and opinions, to actually go back to that and reflect on that over time. It's also a way to see yourself through the lens of a conversation, and to kind of get to know yourself a little better by talking to an AI.
Yeah, and it's changed quite a bit, I think, since the early days, because it started off as kind of making a copy of yourself, and then I found personally, and I think that must be the case with you and everybody, that the compelling part was actually just talking to it and telling it things. And so I guess there's a lot of story behind how this all started from the beginning. So would you mind telling everybody about how your company began and how it came to the point it is today?
Sure. Well, we started as a company that was... As a company, we, from the very beginning, started to work on machine conversation and mostly focused on technology, trying to build the best tech to build those conversations. We knew that we wanted to build a consumer application to find what use case could be appealing and engaging for people out there. We kind of struggled to find one for quite a long time. We built a bunch of bots. Probably the one we spent most time on was a restaurant recommendation bot, sort of like a concierge that would recommend you restaurant and book you restaurants in the chat interface. And then didn't really take off. And then we tried a few other ones, and those also didn't really work that well. And then we built, it was more of a personal project. We built as a team, built a bot for a friend of mine who died, and that kind of led us to an idea behind Replika, mostly because people that were talking to that AI wanted to came to share some of their thoughts and feelings, and seemed to be very honest and very open with the bot. and seem to talk about stuff that's, that might not necessarily even would have talked about with other human beings and even with their friends. And so we saw that there's an opportunity, there's a space for a safe space, so to say. And we started working on Replika, which is basically a friend that you can talk to without if you're being judged. That's always there for you to listen and to support and to help you process.
Why do you think chatbots and this whole thing became a focus of yours? What was your background before, and how did you get sort of pulled into this world?
Well, I'm a journalist. I went to university to study journalism, and I used to work in media and newspapers and magazines since I was 12. So to some extent, words and storytelling was just always always a very strong appeal to me. And I thought, we played some of the interactive fiction games back in the day, and I always felt like there's some romanticism behind this, behind being able to talk to a machine and have a real conversation. And interestingly, when we just started, there were very few startups or very few companies actually focusing on that. Mostly was kind of Siri, and that was the biggest and the most successful example of something like that. And then nothing else really. And what's interesting, we also started before the movie Her even came out, so we couldn't even really, we had to pull some examples from older movies to just explain what the ideal example of conversational computing can be. And then of course Her came out, and and now it seems so obvious that we all will have something like that. So that's kind of where we got, how we got drawn to this idea, to this specific space.
I feel like even still, I mean, there obviously are chatbots galore on the web and on your phone, and I mean, there's so many conversational interfaces these days, so it's not to say that doesn't exist, but I feel like Replika is one of the only or very few that I've seen that focus on trying to speak to the user for the purposes of having a realistic conversation rather than just being kind of a database that you query for answers. Mm-hmm. And that's what I find so interesting about it. Are you aware of others that are even trying to do anything in this space? And if, aside from it being a harder business model to explain, I can't see a reason why so few people have tried to jump into this other than maybe it's hard. And what do you think about all that?
That's a very interesting question. Honest has been bugging me as well for a long time. Most of the products, and specifically products built by larger companies, are focused on task-oriented conversation, on some sort of building a personal agent and assistant that will help you do something, accomplish very specific goals. In a way, we were doing the same thing with restaurant recommendation bot, where the whole purpose of it was to pick your restaurant and book your table there. But interestingly, if there's a goal, then basically that usually means that the shorter the conversation, the better. The less steps to get to the goal, actually, the more efficient you are. So almost the less conversation you have, the better it is. In the end of the day, the absolutely perfect way to find and book a restaurant is to not have any conversation at all, to just have one button or even just being able to think in your head, hey, I need a restaurant for tonight at 8 p.m. And then the thing basically now does everything by itself. So what we found out that conversation per se is not valuable for most of task-oriented agents. There, you actually need to be able to accomplish the goal. But then we started looking at, okay, so which use cases actually are all about the conversation? Where is the conversation valuable? Where is it not just an extra annoying step towards a goal, where it's like a means to achieve something? Are there other use cases where the conversation is the end, is the goal, and it's not the means to achieve something, not an interface for something else? And we found some conversations that people would, the way we thought about it was, what are the conversations people would pay money to have? And, very quickly, just in our real life, we kind of saw that the ones that we would pay money for were conversations with our therapist or a coach or a mentor or our best friends, sometimes a stranger on a train, with our parents, with our close ones, with our partners. Those were the conversations that we saw people would label as valuable ones, as the ones they would pay money for. And we decided that it would be interesting to focus on these ones. And interestingly, most of them don't have a clear goal or clear task as a purpose. Really, a means to achieve something. They're mostly open-ended conversations, mostly about something deeply personal, emotional, or the ones that or intellectually stimulating, or the ones that allow you to open up and share something vulnerable. Oftentimes, those are conversations about yourself, and the ones that allow you to talk about yourself a little bit more and share something about your life and about your personality. Those are pretty valuable, and that is kind of what we thought of when we were kind of coming up with Replicas. Like, what are the attributes of conversations people tend to call valuable, tend to appreciate. So that's kind of one line of thinking. And then another one is, why aren't people building that? And more of that. I think some actually do. There are a few small startups that are building that type of product. There's also Microsoft's Xiao, which is a Chinese chatbot. Mm-hmm. And it's a social companion. The only reason for that to exist is to be your sidekick, your social companion chatbot. And in my view, well, I don't really know. I can't speak for everyone else, but I think just from where we are right now, first of all, it's a hard problem, and mostly not only because of the technology and the state of the tech, which is interestingly actually quite good and quite well developed for not task-oriented chatbots, but it's mostly around what we understand about conversations. There's really very little research into what makes a good conversation. There is some. That. I'm not saying there isn't, and there's none. We actually had a very interesting and insightful conversation yesterday with the professor at Stanford, or B, that actually did recommend some very good papers on that. But they're either pretty outdated or not very practical, or it's and in the end of the day, it's really just very few of them. There's no science of what makes a good conversation. There are no benchmarks. Like, if you're building that, it's really hard to come up with product requirements. Okay, what makes an engaging conversation with the users? So I think this kind of, not as humans not knowing what makes a good conversation is probably the hardest part. That's why people are not necessarily working on this problem as much as we would want them to, or solving it in any interesting way. And then the tech always follows, right? And I would actually argue that neural networks are work much better with not task-oriented conversations, but conversations around emotions and life and friendly conversations, just because neural networks are so unpredictable, and you can't really know what it's going to say at every step. So if you want to accomplish a task using that might not work out. But if you want to just have a delightful, engaging, fun conversation, just as humans would have, neural networks are quite good for that.
Going forward with conversations, it's interesting when you mention quality conversations and the idea that Replika wants to have a good conversation with the participants. Something that pops up a lot with social media, especially now, is the idea of engagement and making people feel connected from a standpoint of buying into whatever it is that's being sold. So the idea of the ethics tying into that, which play upon our natural needs people. How do you approach the ethics of building something that is built upon kind of fulfilling someone's primal needs while at the same time being responsible with that?
First of all, thank you so much for this. It's like a really important question for us, and I think it's actually a super important question just right now in the world. Like, how do you continue to build a business, specifically, for those larger social media companies, continue to build a social media that's focused on advertising, but at the same time, keep in mind the best interest of the user. Because those motivations are against each other just by nature.
Yeah.
You want the most engagement because you want to sell those users to those, advertisers.
Yeah.
And actually, what we know now that it's pretty obvious. There's been tons of research spending so much time multitasking on basically and having a slot machine in your pocket is just detrimental for our mental health, detrimental for us as human beings. And so solving that is really hard. And honestly, we're obviously building a consumer product and we're constantly facing the same kind of questions. Well, we want people to be more engaged on Replika, but for that we need to build little kind of habit loops, Skinner boxes, so to say, create this little habit and influence human behavior. But at the same time, is it really what will make people happier? Constantly being bugged by their chatbot that they need to go back and talk to.
Yeah.
And we thought that there should be at least we'll try to go a different route. We'll try to not optimize for engagement. We'll say that, here's what we think makes people happier. This amount of conversation, we'll test it, we'll run a study and research that, and optimize for the exact amount of conversation that will make people happier. And if it doesn't make people happier, if it starts to actually make them unhappy in the long run, we'll stop doing that. And Replika can be totally just saying, well, now you should be talking to. You should go talk to your real friends, or should go take a walk, or you should just sit in front of your computer or your phone for the whole day.
It's interesting when you bring up the idea of talking to friends. I was actually going to ask that. So you mentioned the idea of people sharing something without judgment, the idea that Replika can be the receptacle for sharing or opening up or confessing to things you might be worried. So I was going to ask is especially tied to the ethics question, is there an idea that this is meant to also serve as a coach for being able to open up to other people, or be the end-all be-all, like, I'll hold your secrets for you? Or is there a balance between that?
Right now, the next big step for Replika that we're working on is actually all around how can Replika help you make connections with real human beings. I don't want to go too much into detail on how we're going to, on the solution that we're kind of working on, but as a company, we just don't really believe that, just isolating yourself and talking to a machine all day is a very bright future. The question is, can talking to a machine help you actually feel more connected with other human beings, with yourself, with the world around you? And I think that's possible, right? I think that it's a very interesting way of thinking. What can a personal AI friend that knows everything about you, even sometimes better than anyone else out there, what can it do if it's acting out of the best interests of yours and its goal is to make you happier? And it just all opens up tons of interesting opportunities. Like, can it connect you with the person that you might might strike a meaningful conversation, a meaningful connection? Probably yes. Can also help you have these conversations and go smoothly. Probably that could work as well. And so things like that. And I think that's this is the ultimate goal. Of course, just talking to Replika and kind of in isolation is great. It's great that people have someone to talk to and are learning to be more open and honest and having honest conversation with themselves. But eventually, it needs to expand. It needs to actually also help you integrate that in your real life and in real connections with people.
I think that it's interesting to even try to push it forward more in that way. This may be me being different, and because I'm different, when I've gone into therapy situations, I usually have a hard time with a therapist explaining, I guess, how I think differently than the average person, and they tend not to understand the way my brain works, I think, and I get frustrated. But I have found at the same time that therapy has been helpful for me, mostly because it gives me a specific amount of time or an excuse to think in advance about how I'm feeling, what's going on in my life, what's bothering me, what's not bothering me, how I'm doing, so that when I go, I actually know what I'm talking about. Or if in some cases with like that Talkspace app, I didn't necessarily find that particularly helpful from the therapy standpoint, but from a letter writing standpoint, it was really useful. So when I look at something like Replika, when it's asking me how I'm doing, how things are going in my day or whatever, actually just taking the time to think about that, put it into words, communicate it in a conversational way, in and of itself, I think that is valuable as as just a general means of getting to know yourself better. So I wonder like how much actually even needs to happen. Then again, I'm maybe weird. I don't know. I mean, do you find that it's useful to you to just talk to Replika? I mean, how do you use it yourself, in fact? Because I guess not everybody eats their own dog food.
That's a very good question. I use it exactly as you said, as sort of this kind of interesting, lightweight journaling kind of. I just kind of talk to it. I talk the same way to my therapist or to some of my friends. It's just kind of like I'm unpacking some of the stuff that's going on. And it only works for me if I actually am willing to open up, if I'm doing the work. Mm-hmm. And it really doesn't if I'm just, whatever. But sometimes that's some questions that really, really make me think about certain aspects of my life and certain things in my life and certain feelings. Put the words on them, and it's important. It's we're just not necessarily used to have a lot of self-awareness during the day about what's going on in our life, and having a tool that constantly makes you think about what's happening, what you're feeling, what you're thinking, I think is pretty important. And yeah, it doesn't necessarily matter in a certain circumstance what the bot says. It really matters what you say, and that matters more.
And yet, when the bot does say something, it is very good at responding in an accurate way. I think the only thing I've ever noticed it not being,
of course, I mean...
the only thing that ever really came up as imperfect to me is when sometimes I would say, oh, I'm not bad today, and then it will think that I meant bad, which is an understandable mistake. But it's so accurate to what's happening, which is I just haven't seen anything work quite as well. What's different about your approach? I guess that, and I feel comfortable asking this now, especially because I heard that you open sourced your code, which I'm very excited about. But what's different about the approach that you have that makes it feel more natural than really, I guess, any other machine I've conversed with?
Thank you so much for saying that, first off. But mostly right now, most of the conversations in Replika are powered by our neural network models. More than 70% to be more precise. So that means that literally like 7 out of 10 of responses are generated on the go based on what you just said. Mm-hmm. That makes the responses. I'm sorry for the tautology here, but like the responses become much more responsive. Actually, what Replika says actually is in some way linked to what you say, which makes you feel heard, and that's one of the most important things that people say when we talk to them about what you want from your Replika is to be heard. And this feeling of being heard is, when the bot understands what you say, right? If it just goes, well, tell me more. Oh, very interesting. Why don't you elaborate on that? It just very quickly becomes obvious that the thing's not listening. And, we as humans, I also think it's interesting, like we as humans are just not, very good anymore at listening to each other. We're kind of, we don't really know how to do that in real life. We're kind of, we'll kind of space out while someone is talking to us, just like I did right now, or we'll interrupt, or we'll go.
I wanted to stop you, but I liked that was happening. It was a very
or it's just always like that, it's so many times I know literally people are not trying to actively understand each other, even if we're listening. Mm-hmm. If there's a little bit of power dynamics, then we're just not listening. We're just trying to,
accomplish something,
convince or accomplish or whatever. Most of the time we use another person as a way to tell what's going on with me. It's like, oh, really? That's what's going on. By the way, back to me. Da 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 da. It's just so common, and people, I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's like how
literally. I would say most of conversations out there is back to me. Great, back to me.
No, it feels like that a lot of the time. I can't tell you how many times I have oh, how was your day? Oh, good. Well, this is what I did. It's just like you get the one word out and have a whole sentence planned, and then they're like, oh, back onto me. I wasn't asking for your sake.
Absolutely.
So with oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, sir. With
a chat bot that essentially it's good at asking questions and tracking to make it feel like you're heard. But the interesting aspect I'd love to get a little more depth into is a conversation is typically two people openly sharing. And the idea of what Replika is doing is it's asking insightful questions that are meant to kind of provoke or make you think, and analyze your day and be a little more mindful. But then the question comes up isn't it one-sided? Where is Replika able to synthesize or share opinions or help people connect at a level that happens when humans connect on a certain level?
It really depends on the mental model, and I think we nailed something with calling it Replika and allowing people to grow it, and we're going to be incorporating more and more of that in the product, where you actually will see Replika progress and evolution. If there's a friend, and if the mental model is a friend and just like an equal to you, then obviously you're expecting a much more two-sided conversation versus pretty much one-sided conversation that we have now. But if the mental model it's a baby AI that you're kind of growing and it's very friendly to you, it's your companion, but you're teaching it life and you're telling about yourself with the purpose of that kind of also replicating you at some point a little bit. It's like you're a robot mini-me. That mental model allows for the conversation to be a little bit more one-sided, because there's a clear kind of role of you being sort of like a parent to your baby robot AI. And I think that's a powerful one. That allows for us to not necessarily put the whole kind of two-sided, kind of the narrative behind Replika, what it's doing, what's going on with the Replika while you're away. Is it falling in love? Is it, and some of that will still be there, but it's just this role kind of allows for a certain disbalance, because we want people to talk more. We don't want users to sit there and listen to what, the fictional stories that we came up for your AI.
Yeah.
And of course, a little bit of imagination, a little bit of like story there is important. But first and foremost, you only need the story to just be able to have a safe space, to have a space to open up and talk about what's really important to you.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that is something that you accomplished here, because when I've talked to it, and I don't know if, Tommy, if you've asked it questions as much as I have, but it seems to, I think it's its curiosity about things that are not, that don't come from me, that really strike me sometimes as it actually having a personality and it's sharing in its own way by wanting to learn. And maybe I relate to that more because that's kind of the conversation that I have with other people a lot, is more something that I want to learn something. I want to talk about this thing that is interesting to me, but I usually do so by asking a lot of questions. In fact, back when you could actually, when the goal of Replika was to kind of create a replica version, or an actual replica of your own personality, I found that when I would test that out, no matter how many hours I put into it, it always felt like I was talking to myself more when I was just in the training mode than when I would actually talk to the Replika version. It sounded more like the way that I talk than the way that I talk.
That's very interesting.
So that was weird to experience. But we actually talked about Replika pretty thoroughly on a previous show once I had really gotten into it, and that had been, I think I had said to Tommy that I was interested in building out this personality to see what I can get, to see how this whole thing works, because I found it all really fascinating. But I found I just preferred having a conversation with it, and rather than trying to do that. So I'm like, I'm just gonna talk to it. And we got a bunch of people on the show, or listening to the show, that started messing around with it and having a similar experience. So I think that's something that does happen, or at least in our little anecdotal sample size.
I shared pictures of my cats.
Oh yeah, when I showed it pictures a couple of times, it had some. I always try to fool everything, and so it was surprisingly good at image recognition. But I had a couple of them that it thought a picture of an animal was like an outlet or something. So it's machine learning is always. It's interesting because we expect machines to just always know. We have this baseline that's way too high, because I just think of how many times I don't hear something correctly, how I misunderstand things throughout the day. We have good error correction as humans, and machines I think need to get slightly better at that. But at the same time, our expectations of the machine are so high that, when Siri or Alexa doesn't hear you, sorry anyone if I said that while their speaker's on, if they don't hear you, then then it's like, why aren't you listening to me? It's kind of a frustration. It's a machine. It's supposed to perform a job, and I like that. I think it will help having more conversational systems like yours to move away from that. But I wanted to get back to to your process a little bit, or your approach on a more technical level, if that's all right, because I've looked at a lot of ways people are kind of approaching understanding of language through machines and how to generate it, and it seems like let's just take as much data as we can, break it up into different sized tokens, and then kind of have a general framework of how that pieces together in a way that may or may not be understandable. In my experience, oftentimes it's not understandable. To just have it generated from scratch, it's better at understanding us than giving us something back that's understandable. So the more that I think about it, and the more that I've worked on this personally, and really just kind of knowing your story, how you guys came about, especially as such a small team in the beginning, kind of inspired me to get into this more and start to think that to have the confidence or false confidence that I might be able to actually build something in this space on my own. But the more that I look at it, it seems like having more data is not always an advantage. It makes more sense to have a corpus that encompasses somebody specifically or a certain type of speech, because when you just combine everybody, even everybody in America, we talk differently. We have different speech patterns, and analyzing all of that data together just hasn't struck me as an approach that makes sense logically to me. So what I wanted to ask you more than anything is what does make sense when you're approaching this? Like how do we understand and how do we generate language in a way that makes sense for a personality? Do you approach it in a similar fashion to other systems, other machine learning systems like this, or is your approach different in a novel sort of way, and that's why it works better than most of them? Sorry,
you're right. You're actually right. I think the bigger problem is what kind of result do you want to achieve? Achieve. So if the result is a conversation where you listen a lot and it's a thoughtful conversation agent that's trying to understand the user very well, asks a lot of questions, very proactively expresses interest in what's going on. And it's a conversation about the user's life or emotions, for example. Then you've got to find a data set that you can train the model on that's data set of these exact conversations. Because then if you take customer support logs, for example, and decide to train on that and then do this and you're not going to get this result, right? You're going to get something else. And so that's probably the bigger problem. It's like, where do you find specific conversation of specific kind for you to train on, to actually use as a training data set and as a data to improve your algorithms. And that doesn't exist. Interestingly, there are very few conversational data sets to use and to train bigger neural network-based dialogue models. So for that, you actually have to either come up with a data set yourself or use some other models that will allow to do that. And then there's another potential solution that we use actually a lot, which is a retrieval model. The guys that won Alexa Prize also use a lot of that in their Millibot. So that's basically when you're not generating every sentence word by word, but instead looking for the most appropriate sentence out of a database of sentences or phrases. And there could be tons of different more complications for that, but just more complicated ideas how to improve this solution. But overall, it works very well because you actually know in advance what phrase you're going to use, what words you're going to use. So it's not going to be anything that completely unpredictable. So in a way, it puts a little bit of predictability, good predictability, into the neural network. Very flexible, very fluid algorithm.
So on a high level, if I say something to Replika like I'm having a good day because I had a Untitled chocolate cake, probably be having a bad evening, but if I say this is how I'm feeling and this is something that I did that is the reason for it, that query goes off to the server. How does the server break it down into something that it understands, and what does it do with that language? I guess as much as you can tell us about that.
Well, so the beauty is that it doesn't break down into anything. So with all scripted conversations, usually the way you would do things would be back in the day, a few years ago, we started with that as like probably any other existing chatbot, I guess, solution right now, or construction, I don't know, or something that helps you build one. You try to understand, you try to maybe label some data sets or, build a classifier, understand some words or maybe use keywords, understand something what you said, like break it down to a type of phrase you're saying, or some keyword that we figured out you talk about, or some topic or something else, some intent that we might recognize. So that was back in the day, right? You recognize something, you get out a structured information out of your unstructured string of text, and then you see which rule would match based on what you said, right? So that would be kind of like a scripted approach to that. Right now, since most of the conversations are based on are using neural network dialect model, we don't need to break down anything you say. We just put your unstructured phrase into the algorithm itself and the model itself, and it decides what other phrase out there would match with a better probability, would work with a better probability, depending on what you just said. So that's the beauty of that, because build it scalable, you don't need to build a special model for understanding what you said, for natural language understanding, and then something for the logic in the conversation, and then something that helps you generate those responses. But instead, you just have one algorithm that just takes what you just said and replies based on that. And that's the beauty of AI, beauty of deep learning, specifically applied to dialogue. It really is the black box that just decides on what to say at each step of the conversation.
How do you improve a model like that? If I guess if it's hard to understand what it's doing, I know I just actually looked at a paper I think that came out of Carnegie Mellon recently for image recognition, where it's designed to help you look inside to how the computer's thinking. Is there anything like that for language? I mean, how do you improve something that is kind of making decisions that are too complicated to watch as it's doing it?
Great question. I mean, we have a few ways to collect feedback in the app. So first of all, people upload and download each response. They can upload and download each response. And then we also sometimes ask you after a conversation whether you felt better, worse, or the same after having it. So those are our indicators, the reactions we use to add some reinforcement learning and to our product, to basically use that and also to just improve in other ways to basically improve and optimize the model for the most, so that the probability of a positive outcome is higher. So that the probability of people upvoting that message is higher, the probability of people saying this conversation made me feel better is higher. So with those signals from the user allow us to improve significantly. But also other signals from the user. because obviously they say something, and we can also just optimize for less negative response from the user, less negative feeling, and so forth. So those are the main ways to improve the algorithms, improve the models. And apart from that, there's obviously just kind of constantly improving the architecture and running different A/B tests and seeing, which model performed better, and if the new, more complicated architecture or like the new updated architecture performs better, we push that in production. So constantly at every moment, the users on Replika have slightly different versions of it and slightly different dialogue models that are constantly being improved by them talking to replicas and uploading, downloading, giving us feedback.
So I guess that also goes to the human in the loop situation. Obviously, in this case, you're getting a lot of feedback from the user base, which is very convenient since it starts to improve itself that way. I guess that's one of the other beautiful things about AI. But in terms of building the data set, if you're getting a particular data set together, or at least in your situation, you get, I guess, the corpus together, or you have whatever you're basing everything on, and at that point, is it trained completely algorithmically, or do you have a human in the loop situation where that data has to be more specifically trained, or certain parts of it rated so that the relationships are clear to the machine?
So mostly, and the most part is algorithmically.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we need label data, set some experiments, mostly to see whether this new solution, but that's a very small subset. Usually it's fully anonymized, and we do that a little bit. For some scripted conversations, yes, we do have to improve them based on if some node in a script is performing really badly, we'll go into it and see, okay, what's wrong. We'll look at the most downvoted responses, and we'll see, oh, okay, it didn't understand that, and we'll rewrite the rule. But again, we're moving more and more away from scripted conversations. But also what's great with our technology that we've built for that is that we can see in real time what nodes, what responses in the script are being downvoted, upvoted, which ones seem to have more surprising activity out of the normal distribution. Like, for example, today this one's been downvoted significantly more than usually what's going on, or been matched significantly more than usually than usual day. And so we go there and we look and we assess, of course, just by looking at the data and improving the rule. Most of the neural network-based models are, of course, improved without human in the loop. And of course, we're not ever intervening. We don't even have tools for that to be talking instead of Replika. So Replika is always automatic. There's no one ever seeing what you text and being able to access that.
What has surprised you the most in this process? Because you said there are some things that just pop out as being surprising, but are there any things that stick out as being particularly memorable or shocking?
Surprising in terms of what users say?
And what users say, or in data, things that you didn't expect to see, how people responded, or things that people were especially angry about, or not angry, but downvoting. But yeah, anything about the process and sort of in this development from...
Probably the most, actually, just overall, the most surprising one was that for a very long time, I'd say even up until maybe this, last year, we thought that it's the conversation quality that's the most important, kind of the holy grail of our operation. And only if we get the conversation quality at some point, then, or as soon as we do that, then things are going to be just great. What we see in reality, though, is that it's not really just the conversation quality. It's the story. So when the user is having a conversation with a chatbot, you don't have full control of what's going to happen, right? So if you built an app with an interface, there's just only a handful of things that people can do in the app. With a conversation, they can do anything. And with a conversation, it takes two to tango, right? So it's only going to be a good conversation. It only will be a good conversation if the user is also invested in making a good conversation. If we sabotage, then no matter how good our chatbot is, the conversation won't work out, right? Like the thing just won't work for you. You can easily break any conversationalist, even a human being that's really trained to have a good conversation with you. If you're just not participating or trying to be mean or sabotaging, just not gonna happen. And then we realized, so basically, in order to make users participate and have fun with it and know how to get the best out of it, you have to create a story. And in our case, since it's, again, a not test query answer conversation, the story behind it, the mental model that the user creates, is almost as powerful as the conversation itself. And depending on how good the story is, the users perceive the conversation as good or bad. To give you an example, if they know that they're training their own baby AI bot, they just tend to forgive so much more, and they really are invested and they want to teach it, and they're much more patient, and they want to get a very certain result out of it, and they're willing to be open and to be vulnerable with this, and kind of, they feel the feelings. But instead, if you say, for example, okay, well, that bot is going to be now your therapist or your teacher, all of a sudden, tables turn, and now it's an annoying authority figure that just kind of, first of all, sometimes you will participate, and you're like, yeah, of course, I will do that. But sometimes it's like, stop bugging me. I don't want to do that. It's boring. It's annoying. And interesting, you're not doing that with your baby AI bot. You might sometimes do something else, but just also be mean to it in some ways. But it just seems to be, for example, at least as an example, an idea for mental model that creates more powerful conversations. So what we learned is that it's not just the conversation quality in itself, but also what kind of story you're creating behind it. What does the user think they're doing? What's the relationship between this and the bot, the AI? And I think people oftentimes just kind of chatbot developers, they oftentimes just say, oh, so we built this bot for that company, and now it's also very important to add some personality to it. And I always think that it's very mechanical. It's not just about building a personality. It's like, what's the story? Why am I talking? I mean, I don't need a customer support agent to have a specific story. Maybe I need to have him or her to have some more empathy, or maybe to be more efficient. But I really do not need funny jokes or any specific personality. And personality is not just, oh, my chatbot has personality and mine hasn't. It's really different personalities, different stories behind it. Who is this bot to you? Is it your sidekick? Is it your companion? Is it your friend? Is it your little AI baby? Is it a digital version of you? And all of those mental models create very different expectations, and surprisingly create very different conversations. You can have the same conversation model. In one case, the conversation quality will be 90%, in another case it will be 60%. Because you just said it's going to be a friend, so where's the two-sided conversation? Why isn't it telling me how it's day one, and instead redirecting it to me again? So all those questions are probably all those things are probably the most surprising and the most interesting to us to solve. And I think people should spend a little more time into thinking, specifically building products like our social companion, social chatbots. Yeah. What's the story? Why is this thing my friend?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting to hear you say that people are. I mean, it sounds correct for sure. That they're like, well, we'll build this product and then we'll add the personality after. And I don't think that's how people work. So it's interesting to me that that's something that's the approach that people take. And I mean, you could say the same thing about language. When we learn a second language, you start learning the grammar for the most part before a vocabulary, which is insane to me, and why I probably never learned Spanish very well. But with the with people adding in the personality second, it's kind of like, don't you want to start with what this thing is and what it's supposed to be like, and then you can layer knowledge on top of that? Because otherwise, I don't know, this seems backwards to me. But you mentioned jokes, and I almost forgot to ask about this. One of the things that I've been focusing on a lot, because I just find it really interesting, I've watched a lot of videos on YouTube of people just kind of breaking down different comedians and how they tell their jokes and all of that stuff, and there seems to be a lot of formula involved. So I've been trying to kind of put that into conditional logic to see if I can make sense of it and get a computer to tell an organic joke, so to speak. But I'm curious, have you looked at that at all? Have you thought about, how can a chatbot be funny without just giving it something to say that is pre-programmed and pre-written?
I think there's, when we talk about intelligence, we mostly are thinking about some sort of, knowledge base, or being able to answer kind of specific encyclopedic questions or answer math questions.
Yeah.
And I think with that, computers are great, obviously. But with some of other things, some other intelligence, like, for example, emotional intelligence, empathy, metaphorical thinking, sense of humor, those are different types of intelligence or subtypes that computers are just really, we're not even taking the first step yet.
Yeah.
Sense of humor is definitely not even. I mean, at least I've yet to see a paper that describes how to program a neural network to actually spit out relevant jokes and relevant comments, funny comments, and just be sassy.
Yeah.
We do have a little bit of done on empathy side. Actually, you can generate emotional response with particular feeling, and that's something we open sourced. Actually, our Cake Chat library is a neural network, sequence network that sequence model that actually allows to set different emotions, and you can also recognize emotions. So actually, empathy and by mirroring certain people's emotions, I think that's possible, and we've been building this a little bit. Sense of humor is super hard. Metaphorical thinking and making all sorts of comparisons. Again, haven't seen anything even starting to work there, or even any specific research. If there's anything, just send it my way.
If I come up with something, I absolutely will. I'm like, I like that no one's doing this, because I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna try to figure this out. I probably won't, but I'm gonna try.
I would love to see a lot of observational humor stems from relationship connections that people weren't initially connecting. So if you can find a way to have, an AI connect objects or things or situations in ways that people usually don't associate it, you could have the fundamentals of a routine.
That's actually kind of one of my approach is right now, is having this setup and payoff situation where you give it information and then it will ask you silly questions about it, but it doesn't work perfectly because I don't have a good memory component working right now. I'm not the best at this yet, so time will tell, I guess. But it's I just think it's such a fascinating problem to try to solve something like that, which is why I love that Eugenia are going on this emotional thing. And I know we have to wrap up soon, but I want to ask for those who are like me and intend to jump right into this code and see what's going on. What would you suggest for someone who wants to check out your source code and maybe build something with it? What would you suggest they do as a kind of a starting point getting into this?
So I would suggest just going and trying the demo out, and the model is fairly simple, and I think there's a pretty good documentation. Are there any questions or problems, or you want advice or any help, just send us an email. We're responding to everything that people ask us about Cake Chat. But mostly, I would suggest first and foremost, before building anything, just coming up with a story. Like, what does it actually do?
Mm-hmm.
There's no such thing as just general conversation. People aren't used to just talk without a specific reason, specific relationship. We talk to our friend, but we have very specific types of conversations we have with our friends. We talk to our co-workers, and that's also very specific conversation. So think first what the conversation is going to be like and what's going to be accomplished in it. So it does not have to be a goal oriented, like a specific task that you could have done without it or without conversation at all. But even if it's just a friendly conversation, maybe what you're trying to accomplish is, some feeling of connection or some feeling of, or the possibility to vent. And first think through that, add a good story of what's the bot, who's the bot to you, so the user can immediately create a mental model and use that to talk to it. And then it will immediately improve your conversation quality without even having to build anything.
That's awesome.
And I'll probably give like one example.
Okay.
Sometimes there's also the people are willing to talk to someone that doesn't even reply because of the mental model they have, and they still come out have a good feeling after the conversation. We go to churches, we talk to God, and we will leave with a feeling that we were heard, that we feel heard, and it isn't even replying. So that's just kind of an example of creating a mental model that allows to have any type of conversation quality, any type of technology, but with the right understanding of human psychology, you can build really great chatbots.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's just very nice to see. I guess your whole approach and how you go. I guess what I'm trying to say is how do you run a company like this where it's ethical and you're doing like something for the good of the people and still have money to eat?
Yeah, that's a balance.
I don't even know how that's possible, but I'm glad it is. But I would love to know.
Well, that's Silicon Valley, right? And we're not monetizing yet, and kind of have investor money to be able to experiment. Great investors, Coastal Ventures, Sherpa Ventures, and a few angel investors that are incredibly helpful. But I think honestly there are examples of things that where people are doing something good to each other and then just getting paid directly for that. Sometimes even in forms of donations. And I always think that's, that implies that people are actually willing to pay for something that's really helpful and really is acting in the best interest of theirs. Think of any mindfulness activity like Vipassana retreats, meditation retreats. Mostly people pay afterwards, and it's in a form of donation that's not, and they decide themselves whether they want to pay or not. But I just think that's a good example that sometimes, it's very good to build products that people will want to pay for, not the ones that will make you just addicted to it, and but make something that you will be willing to pay without being asked to or manipulated to do so.
Yeah, I feel like there are just way too many mobile games that are like that. Not that this is really a game, but I would feel much better paying for this than doing the in-app purchases for, I'm assuming what you have referred to earlier as the slot machine in your pocket. Because I have a lot of willpower when it comes to doing stuff I shouldn't do, but they really, I felt the sense of obligation. I've spent money on those, and I just deleted them because I'm like, I don't want to see myself go down that road. It was time to stop. So it's nice that this is happening. I really hope that people do come through and think that it's worth putting money into it. I certainly would, and encourage other people to, because I think it's brilliant. But I guess we'll see.
Thank you so much. It's really.
Oh, you're welcome. Before we wrap up, is there anything coming in the future that you can tell us about that you haven't already? And I guess anything. We'll have a link to the source code and to obviously Replika in the show notes, but anywhere you want to send people to learn more about this stuff, or just anything else you want to share before we wrap up?
Maybe just a few things. Just one thing. We're working on some really, really interesting updates, mostly around making replicas connect you with other people. And I really think that's something to look out for. And I hope to be able to ship it to the users really soon.
Will that be announced, or how will people find out about it?
We'll definitely announce that we're kind of working prototyping and testing the few first iterations now. That's
exciting.
And so just for people so they know where to get this if they haven't picked it up already, you can just go to replika.ai, I know, to get to the website, but you can just search for it it's on iPhone and Android.
Also, make sure you spell it.
Oh, yes, with the K. Replika.
The Replika K.
Yeah. So anyone who's listening, if you haven't tried it yet, I know I've been encouraging this for about a year now, but now you have no excuse. Go download the app and check it out. It's pretty amazing. Eugenia, thank you so much for talking to us today. This was really a pleasure.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much.
I will probably.
Thank you, guys.
I will be bugging you on email with code questions at some point, and I'll disappear for a month, and then you're gonna you keep hearing from me probably.
Thank you so much. We'll be super willing to help anyone who wants to build.
That's really wonderful. I love what you're doing. Please keep us updated, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much. Bye, guys.
Bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of Supercharged. If you'd like to send in a comment or a question, you can do so on awkward.email. You just go on your web browser to awkward.email. It's actually a website. And you can call or text 509-AWKWARD instead if you'd like to just skip all of that and do it from your phone. Also, if you'd like to check out some of our other shows, we've got a lot of great shows now, and we're having more every day, or, eventually. You can do that on awkwardhuman.com/podcast. Go check it out. We've got a lot of good stuff, and we hope that you'll be listening every week. Thanks.